Welcome, people. This is Mac and my guest, Bob, with my commentary. Good morning, Bob. How are you?
Good morning, Mac. I'm doing just fine. Thank you. How about you?
Doing good. Today we want to continue with what we discussed last week regarding the reparations, especially as it relates to Representative Cori Bush, H.RS 414. That's in the Judiciary Committee right now. And I think we should stay focused on this reparations because, as one doctor stated, historian stated rather, that every 15 years the subject of reparation comes up. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. But I was looking at a paper written by Dr. Robert H.R.S. He is a assistant professor at Duke University. And the title of that paper, written on WIPsociology.org, states that the past is the past, how slavery still benefits white Americans. He went on to state that our arguments against racial reparations in the United States often lean on the assertions that slavery was a long time ago, that no one alive today suffered as a slave in the United States, and that no one alive today owned any slaves in the United States. The argument generally proceeds that therefore no one suffered from slavery and no one benefited, so no one deserves reparation. The past is the past, they say. However, Dr. Reese continued to state that sociologists and other social scientists disagree with this assertion. He states that the past may be the past, but it continues to have a measurable influence on contemporary social outcomes and legacy of slavery. Research shows that chattel slavery is directly related to a wide variety of phenomena in the United States: violent crime rates, Black election turnout, executions, educational inequality, economic inequality, school segregation, and internationally, researchers found that the slave trade significantly stunted the economic development of places in Africa where slaves were stolen and places where slavery was more widespread historically, with the exception of the United States. That is very significant, Bob, because Dr. Reese said that his study, he wanted to explore how slavery increased the fortunes of white people in general. He didn't want to just look at how the disadvantages of Black people and how slavery affected Black people and making them have certain disadvantages, but he wanted to instead look at the advantages that slavery has done to the white people in general today, not just those with direct ties to slave ownership or particular industries. He stated, I sought to understand how slavery may have created conditions that allowed all white people to ultimately profit at the expense of the Black population. He went on to state that to answer the question by analyzing counties and slave states in the U.S., although slavery was legal across the South and the Southern economy, indeed, the American economy relied heavily on the institution. The actual use of slave labor varied widely from county to county. In some places, there were few or no slaves at all. In others, like Washington County, Mississippi, he said slaves constituted upwards of 90% of the total population. And what he was trying to show is that how slavery, the more slaves that was in a particular area, the better off the white populations were and still are today. But that is so on point there, Bob, with what we talked about. And I don't want to go into all the details of his study at this moment. But what do you see the benefits of slavery has been to the Caucasoid Americans?
Well, I don't think that this discussion, this conversation that you and I are having this morning could be any more propitious on this Memorial Day of 2023 for this reason. Since we were brought here back in the 1600s, 435 years ago, up until this very day, as that professor says, we have been America's home. America is the Negroid's pimp. They've been pimping us ever since we were brought here, and they're pimping us today. And our intellectuals, our politicians, none of these people want to talk in common language so that the man on the street can understand what they're trying to say. What he just said was precisely what I said in a different vernacular. We are America's home. They have put us out on the corner and said, get out there and get that money, B, and bring it to me. And that's what we do every single day. And as soon as one of the hoes, say, hey, look, pimp president, and all of these pimps have been Caucasoids. One of them, two of them, one from Arkansas and the other from Illinois, I guess were biracial Caucasoids. But they, for the most part, they all been Caucasoid pimps. And pimps know how to use a hoe. And that's the way they've been using us. And we don't like to look at it at these terms. I went back and I looked at that guy Lowry.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at his lecture about why he was against reparations. And he said essentially, well, because it's bad social policy and it's bad ethics. And I thought to myself, now what the hell has that got to do with putting $350,000 in your checking account, Bob?
Right.
It don't have anything to do with that.
What about
Ethics.
what about the bad ethics that was all part of the whole process there, the slavery?
That's exactly my point. The pimping starts with the president of the United States, and he gives it all the way down the line to his little pimps. Pimps in banking, pimps in mayors of cities, pimps in during the judicial system. And I was thinking about this. It struck me yesterday. You could not have this happen by Negroids in a Caucasoid neighborhood. Detroit is 70 to 80% Negroid. And right downtown, about 100%, every year they have this techno musical festival. And those, for the most part, 90% of them are Caucasoids. And I don't, there's nothing wrong with that. But it just occurred to me, Bob, what would happen if a bunch of Negroids decided they wanted to have a blues festival in Birmingham, Michigan, downtown in the center of town, or in Grosse Pointe, right downtown in the heart of the city. And you couldn't do that. And you can't go to any big city in the country and have 50,000 Negroids assemble for a festival like that, because we are nothing but hoes in the eyes of the Caucasoid. And so that, I think that doctor, that professor that you cited is right on point. We've been pimped. We're still being pimped, and we don't want to talk about it like that. I got to thinking about the fact that we're ashamed of the fact that we're slave descendants. We like to wear our gold and our jewelry and our necklaces. We ought to get a common sign and put it on a necklace. Every one of us that's a descendant, all 40 million of us. And where's this? I am a slave descendant who needs reparations.
Right.
Wear that on our neck. Be
Right.
proud of the fact that you're a descendant.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, because it'll be. I was thinking about this, and I'll say this and shut it down. But I was looking at the they've been having this debate about raising the credit limit, and you had these two black Congress people there on the floor of the Congress just talking about how this is going to affect my constituents, and I'm thinking, well, these are your constituents must be black, or for the most part black, I would think.
Yeah.
And I mean, really aggressively fighting to get that debt limit raised. Now I wonder why they don't have that same kind of gusto in fighting for Representative Cory Bush's bill, H.R. 414, because we are pimps. I mean, we're hoes being pimped, and we recognize it, and we are satisfied with it. That's my take on that, Mac.
Wow, that's something else, Bob. There, I really appreciate that. What you were talking about the some type of festival they were having in downtown Detroit there, right?
Right.
Well, I saw something recently, video about a festival, not just a car fest. People had their cars out there, these jacked up cars, that can bounce around and all of that type of stuff with the fly wheels and everything. And they had this show going there in Lakeland, Florida, at a place there in Webster Park, which is, to me, it looked like a black neighborhood. But you know what? You had your slave patrols coming through there, fully dressed down in military gear, just walking around. I mean, did you see the slave patrols down there at that festival you were talking about?
No, not there. One commentator said that because somebody was calling about the fact that how peaceful it was, and this commentator said, "Yeah, you got a lot of police officers that are undercover."
Yeah. Well, I tell
You know,
you, this was peaceful too, as far as I could see. But they were ready. You could tell they was ready to use their batons.
right?
But there's another gentleman, Bob, by the name. He's a historian, pretty famous. At least I won't say how famous he is, but he's well known. He's a graduate of Georgetown University there in Washington D.C. And I think I saw him give a talk there once along these lines about reparations. And slavery. And he stated there's three myths about slavery. And said one of the myths is that slavery was not fuel for the growth of the American economy, that it actually put brakes on the U.S. growth. He said there's a story that claims slavery was less efficient, that wage labor and industrial production wasn't significant for the massive transformation of the U.S. economy that you see between the time of the independence and the time of the Civil War. And yet, that period is when you see the U.S. go from being a colonial, primarily agricultural economy to being the second biggest industrial power in the world, and well on its way to become the largest industrial power in the world. So that's a myth right there, you see. It's another myth that slavery in and of itself as an economic system. I hear other guys talking like this. Thomas Sowell talks about the economic aspects of slavery. So there wasn't any benefit to the U.S. economy. But here, Ed Baptist states that another myth is that slavery in and of itself as an economic system, this is the myth, was unchanging. We fetishize machine and machine production and see it as quintessentially modern. The kinds of improvements in production and efficiency that you see from hooking up a cotton spindle to a set of pulleys, which are in turn pulled by a water wheel or steam engine. That seemed as more efficient than the old way of someone sitting there and doing it by hand. But you can also see changes in efficiency if you change the pattern of production and you change the incentive of the labor and the labor process itself. And we still make these sorts of changes today in businesses, the kind of transformation that speed up work to a point where we said that it is modern and dynamic. And we see these types of changes in slavery as well, particularly during cotton slavery in the 19th century U.S. But the difference, of course, is that it is not the work of wage workers or professional workers. It is the work of enslaved people. And the incentive is not to do this or you'll get fired or you won't get a raise. The incentive is that if you don't do this, you'll be whipped or worse. And he states that the final third myth about this is that there was not a tight relationship between slavery in the South and what was happening in the North and other parts of the modern Western world in the 19th century. It was a very close relationship. Cotton was the number one export from the U.S., which was largely an export-driven economy as it was modernizing and shifting into industrialization. And the slavery economy of the U.S. South was deeply tied financially to the North, to Britain, to the point that we can say that people who were buying financial products in these other places, like the North, Britain, were in effect owning slaves and were certainly extracting money from the labor of enslaved people. So you hear all these people saying that, oh, how did I benefit from this? Well, if you lived up in New York or the Northeast or wherever, you benefited. If you up there, you're working, where you're working in a factory or whatever you're working in up there, a bank, or insurance company, all these different businesses like this, Bob, was related to slavery during this time period. And that's what we have to understand, that how and have to remember that slavery was everywhere in 1776. At the time of the Declaration of Independence, slavery is legal in every one of the newly created 13 states. And for the most part, slavery is associated with the sectors of the economy most closely connected to the Atlantic world, systems of exchanges and markets that link the new U.S. to Europe, to Africa, to the Caribbean, and to Latin America. I mean, what he's saying here, Bob, in essence, is that no matter how you look at everything, slavery was the locomotive that pushed this economy into the industrial revolution, and it benefited other Europeans as well. So therefore, by excuse me, by benefiting them, and they taking the products from this slavery, they too saw their own slaves. So the world itself benefited, because you talk about excuse me, enslaved people working in Virginia tobacco fields, where they produced significant amounts of revenue for the British Crown. Or people in the rice fields in South Carolina and Georgia. So what do you think of some of these points here, Bob?
Well, it just further fortifies in my mind the fact that to deny the fact that what has happened over the last 435 years is not having a significant effect or impact on the not only America's economy today, but the world economy, and it still is existent today, although in much more subtle forms than it was 100 years ago. I'll give you an example. How many of these Negroids in these professional jobs get paid dollar for dollar like their Caucasoid counterparts? I would venture to say very few of them. How many Negroids live in $500,000 homes throughout the United States because of the wealth that they've acquired over the last 100 years? I would venture to say very few of them. How many Negroids own television stations and newspapers? The Negroids have been here in this country just as long as for the last 400 plus years, and many of them, like W.E.B. Du Bois and others, have graduated from the best schools. They've had the opportunity to build mega plants where they raise much money and wealth for themselves and their people. But how much of that has happened? It hasn't happened. And the reason it hasn't happened is for two basic reasons, in my opinion. Race, first of all, the racism within the world society is so subtle and so embedded that you don't see it. You don't think about it. I was looking at a news show the other day, and that's why I don't call people white or black unless I, sometimes just in conversation. But that's why I say Negroid and Caucasoid and Mongoloid. Because if you look at it, there's no such thing as a white person or a black person. And I'll give you the contrast. I was watching TV the other day, and this Caucasoid was on there being questioned, and he had on a white shirt. And it just occurred to me, that guy's not white. And then, and in the same sense, I thought, and look at you, Bob. They might say you black. You're not. Coal is black. You're not black. But they use those terms to embed in your mind the fact that there's some inferiority in the white and the black. Why do you think they use black, the White House? And I was reflecting on that inauguration of that guy that's now the king of England. If you notice, they had the white horses up front pulling the chariot, and the black horses were in the back. These little subtle things that are implanted on people's minds all over the world, and they don't know what's happening to them. So when somebody gets out and says, "Oh yeah, he's a white guy," and they just accept that. Oh yeah, that's the White House.
Yeah, well,
How come it couldn't have been the Black House? So when I see all these things happen, it's very apparent to me that the reason that we're in the state slave descendants 435 years later that we're in is because it's more than just the money, but the money would be a big, big help. And that's why I think that Representative Cori Bush has done herself and her race a proud action by coming up with
well,
H.RS 414.
so what did they say was the net worth of blacks versus the whites in this country? If white worth, say, if they got $120,000 net worth, blacks got what, $7 or $5 on
No,
that?
to be about it's 10%. So if it was a dollar for every dollar that the Caucasoid has, the Negroid has 10 cents.
So that'd be 120,000. That'd mean they worth 12,000. I saw something somewhere a lot less than that, but the but we but the whole thing is, Bob, is that a lot of people seem to think that that, as I stated at the beginning of this show, that blacks shouldn't have any reparations. One of the myths out there, anyway. But if you go back and, like, we've outlined some of the things of how blacks contributed to this whole country here, and what as helping get it to moving forward into the industrial revolution, as slaves. And we should be, as Representative Cori Bush states, we should be compensated for that, because there was over 222 million hours of unpaid labor that would be roughly, in today's dollars, about $97 trillion. And her computation, she's requesting, I think it comes to like $14 trillion, which is significantly lower than the actual wages that our forefathers, ancestors earned. Now, they receive nothing from that. Now they've given 160 acres through the Homestead Act, that we talked about last week, to the white Europeans, and they would not give 1 acre to blacks, to the black Americans, even though at that time the emancipation, which freed the slaves, was in 1863, I believe. And blacks got nothing from that. I equate, and so to some of the whites out there who says they didn't benefit from this. Well, it's a known fact that if these tens of thousands of whites, or maybe hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many, it was over 240 million acres or something like that. I'm not quite sure on that, but we can check that out. But whatever number it was, now their offsprings or descendants, they benefited from those acres that was given to those Europeans that came over here. And you can also equate other things that happen. If a man went out there 2 centuries ago and robbed a bank for $100,000, and he brought that money back and he invested that money, and that money grew to a few $1,000,000, and then it just passed on down from generation to generation. So that's illegally gotten money right there. But those people, that descendants who received that money, they don't think this is illegal. And the same thing with the slavery. They stole the wages and the labor from the slaves, and it's been turned into assets for not just the slave owners, but for other people who are associated. As we stated earlier, as Dr. Reese said, that if you have a lot of slaves in a particular area, everybody benefited in that from the slave labor. And even today, where there was you take a certain city, say Indianapolis, Mississippi, or whatever, if there's such a place, and there was many slaves there, then today those whites that still live there, they are much better off than the blacks there. But you're going to find that all over the country pretty much anyway, that the whites going to be much better off than the blacks, because everything in this country, when all the newer European people say, I only come over here 1 generation ago. Well, I don't care whether 1 generation or 5 generations. If you're white, you were better off than the blacks that was already here, because you could immediately come here. You could get into back at the turn of the century, when they had the Boilermaker unions and all of this type of things, machinery unions. Blacks couldn't get into those unions. You benefited from that industrial revolution at that point, which was propelled by the African slaves. And that's how this country got the push to become an industrial powerhouse. So people, you should understand that our ancestors contributed more to this country than they want you to know, and more so than others, because here you got people out there are working, they are laborers, they're working on jobs, you got the employer, you got the employee. But the difference in that employer and an employee and the slave owner and the slave is the slaves could not walk away. If they didn't work hard, they would get whipped, or even worse. Whereas that employer-employee relationship, there wasn't that much incentive. If the guy didn't feel like working, he didn't work. So what could happen to him? He get fired, he go somewhere else, or he quit and go somewhere else and get another job. But that wasn't what that slave could do. If he didn't go out there and pick that cotton 400% to help the cotton to go up, increase the percentage of bales that they picked up by 400% over those 60 years that they was producing at such a rapid pace. Now he could be beaten, or he could be killed, or sold off, for that matter. But Bob, this has been an interesting topic here again. what we are trying to get people to understand is the significance of the slaves' contribution and how the whites benefited from this here. So they can't, and like this one gentleman stated, he stated that, and this was Dr. Ed Baptist. He says, what I am happy to see is that because of the work of activists involved in the movement for Black lives and actives in the different reparation movements, some of the questions and critiques that a few of us historians try to amplify are being amplified far more broadly and effectively by these forces in society. The question of reparations, for instance, comes up every 15 years or so as something that the media engages with, and there's predictably a backlash as you see a massive white resistance to the idea of reparation. And that backlash plays a role in burying these types of questions. So he said, I hope that whatever the policy outcomes might be, I hope that the conversations don't get buried by that resistance. And I'll be remiss if I didn't point out that we are talking about reparations in a moment where white nationalism is ascendant. And in the past, those kind of phenomena have had the effect of not only producing violence, but they have also suppressed discussions about how we address a question of what is owed after slavery. And finally, and the debt is so great that whites have little claim to say that something is too much to pay. They have no standing to argue that the wealth distribution should remain where it is today. There's no justifiable way, in my opinion, to make that argument. So I'm worried that the violence of our time may suppress any movement toward a better resolution of the arguments implied by calls for reparation. Dr. Baptist made that statement in 2019, Bob. And you go back and he said every 15 years there's get this thing up. We all start talking about reparation, the media push it. Then you start getting guys like Senator McConnell coming out and say, I wasn't here. I didn't have any slaves. There's nobody here that was a slave. No black that was a slave. They don't, and I think that we kind of, based on these gentlemen that I've quoted here, have kind of put out an argument in what you've said, Bob. There's an argument that we should have reparations. And as Representative Corey Bush has put out there, we definitely should be paid for those 222 million hours that our ancestors worked. It's like if you were in a lawsuit and you happen to die before that lawsuit is settled, I'm sure that your descendants will be able to receive that money, Bob. And that's what we're calling for now. Pay us now. And if you are black, don't stand back. Step up front and support H.R.S. 414, as Bob so aptly states. Bob, I want to thank you for another great show. I want to thank my listeners, and I urge them to subscribe and share and like this video. We look forward to coming back discussing this topic again. And I'd like to leave Bob with the last word.
Well, Mac, I appreciate that. And I just want to thank you for the very wise discussion that you have just shared with us, with me, and your audience. And I just hope that that we'll take advantage of that advice, because if we do, like this professor said, every 15 years something like this comes up. It may not happen over the next 15 or 30 years, but we've been here for over 400 years, so at least it's being discussed now. And those of us who acknowledge the fact that we are slave descendants, our progeny will benefit from that. So thank you again, Mac, and I appreciate being a guest on your show.
Yeah, I got one last question here, Bob. You work in contact with your representative, right?
That's right. I was in contact. I didn't talk to her directly. As a matter of fact, I talked in both instances. I called Representative Rashida Tlaib's office and left messages, both a voice message and a text message indicating the nature of my call. And I also called, now these were their home offices. And I also called Representative Cori Bush's St. Louis office and left a voice message indicating my support for H.RS 414, and that I would like to have a copy of that sent to me so that I could read it and be more intelligent about what's in it. I have not heard from either one of them thus far, but this is what I plan to do. I plan to call their Washington offices and leave those same messages that I left on their uh, home offices, and see what kind of response I get from them, because I'm not gonna. I plan like you do for the rest of my life. Now that I see the significance of this and the fact that for the first time a representative has attached a dollar value. See, Kanye's bill, H.R. 40, didn't have a dollar value attached to it. Representative Cori Bush's bill has a dollar value attached to it, $14 trillion. And I did the math. And if you use 40 million uh, uh, Negroids as your base, that amounts to $350,000 per Negroid slave descendant. So I intend to leave those messages with their Washington offices, and I intend to stay on this because this is an important matter. And I'm just miffed at the fact that more, and I think it will grow though. It's like we're in the planting season now. You plant a seed out there, and before you know it, you got a big tomato plant, big red, luscious tomatoes. Well, this planting this seed that you started out on your back commentary several weeks ago is going to grow. It may not be 15 years from now, may not be 30 years from now, but I contend that it will continue to grow back. So I thank you again, and have a great day, brother.
All right, thanks, Bob, and thank you, thank the audience, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.